So we're here again for another attempt at intelligent conversation. Today we happen to be in a situation where we're going to enjoy some adult beverages as we have this conversation. Today what we're going to consider is the challenges with experts. So there are two noted challenges with experts. One challenge is that experts are often very good at doing what they do, but they're not necessarily good at knowing how they do it, or are they able often to articulate it. So there's an old saying that those who can do and those who can't teach. That unfortunately doesn't hold particularly true when you examine experts. Now, the other challenge is that experts fall prey to a phenomenon that we've talked about before, which is essentially the inability or the difficulty to set aside or forget previously learned knowledge. Now, the challenge becomes that we look to experts for essentially content expertise. Right? So we have a question about, let's just say we have a question about how something moves through a population, right? Do you know the name of the type of expert that we would want to talk to there?
Like what they would be, like the title or the field that they would be in?
Yes.
No.
Epidemiology.
Okay.
Okay. Now, epidemiology is essentially the study of a phenomena at the population level. The thing that would occur is that the epidemiologist is going to ask a question: how does this phenomena occur at the population level? How does it spread? How does it move? How does it propagate?
Does it always talk about the rate as well?
It depends on the question.
Okay.
Yeah, speed would be a quantity that could be measured.
Okay.
Now the challenge there is that it depends on the preconceived knowledge or the manner in which that particular epidemiologist tends to model stuff. Now, epidemiology models can be extremely complex, like very, very complex. And then what you'll have is, because a concept from epidemiology can affect policy, say public policy, right? How does the coronavirus spread? Or how is it going to spread at the population level? Depending on the epidemiology that's performed and provided to a government or to the people in the government can make a choice, we have a challenge that depending on how inclusive that epidemiology is, we have to make decisions on that data, right? So the problem with the expert there is that expert epidemiologist may have a very good model, but it may not be the best model to inform policy.
Right.
Okay, so this isn't necessarily the best way to talk about the challenge with experts, but it is something to consider. So you have the expert that has essentially doubled down on their previously learned knowledge. They make their epidemiological model, they provide that to a government institution, the government institution will then apply that, it affects you and I, right? The challenge becomes, in today's world, everybody's a personal broadcaster, right? So what are the methods that has allowed everybody to become a personal broadcaster that you're aware of?
Social media in general. You have YouTube, you have Twitter, you have Instagram, you have all these platforms you can use. Yeah.
Would you say you're not an avid social media user?
Correct.
Like at all?
I'm just learning. I'm dabbling into it now.
How do you feel about it?
It's very awkward and very unsettling.
Well, it's not your fault. You're the wrong age. And also, like almost a cave person.
Yes. Yes.
I behave like a cave person in a lot of ways, but the idea that, in your experience with the social medias that you've used, are there different ways that the same individual will behave on each social media platform?
Yes,
okay.
Very much so. I've actually had a conversation with the same person on 3 different platforms and then be in 3 different moods.
Yeah. So this is only to say that based on how these social media platforms are built, there are different ways that people seem to have developed a culture worldwide on how they use it, the types of things that they do.
Yes.
Right? There's no need to necessarily specify each one, but would you say that experts are able to harness the power of these social media platforms to put their opinions out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course.
So because each individual expert has an opportunity to reach people that they wouldn't normally reach, Would you say that in your experience that you've seen competing views from experts on these social media platforms?
Yes.
Okay. And what has that done when you, as an individual, this is more of a constructivist thing, right? So the truth is dependent on the individual. When you see these battling experts, what happens to you?
Well, it just makes me question the information in general.
Okay.
Like, as I'm looking at someone say that this is more accurate or the truth, and someone else says, no, this is the truth, it really makes me kind of just want to push back from all of it.
So, if I use the term reliability, have I talked to you about that in a way that has made you understand the term reliability?
Not so much.
Okay, so reliability is essentially if we apply the same thing to multiple situations, do we get the same outcome or a similar outcome?
Okay.
Or there's different types of reliability. There's construct reliability, content reliability. But essentially, if I ask this question of everybody, would I get a fairly similar answer?
Okay.
In your experience with what you're talking about and saying that these experts are not necessarily agreeing on a position, they're essentially in a publicly available space having disagreements.
Right.
Would you say that that is a good example of reliability? And maybe as an alternate term, use the term consistency. Is the information reliable / consistent?
Well, based on the example, I'd say no.
Okay. So we have a reliability issue. So there are some concepts as far as evaluating information. Validity. The term validity is essentially, is this thing doing what it says that it's doing?
Okay.
Reliability is, do we have consistent outcomes if we apply this in varying situations?
Right.
Then the term utility is, can we actually do this?
Right.
So one of the funny things with validity is that it actually has a reliability component. So it's hard for it to be valid if it's not reliable.
Right.
So it's almost incestuous as far as those terms mixing, right?
Okay.
It's like, wait, I need one of you. Oh, damn it. It's like, So the idea is that when you are having mixed messages or essentially competing messages from content experts, you're experiencing a reliability problem. It is not consistent.
Right.
What can you do at that point?
As the person consuming this data?
What should it do to your decision making? Or not necessarily what should it do, but maybe what does it do?
Well, I feel like if I'm not looking it up myself to validate, and I'm only using the information that's presented to me, I pick a side. I pick one of the experts to kind of go towards, or I'm picking and choosing the things that I like out of each expert's information.
Okay, so what would make you pick the side of one expert over another?
Unfortunately, it'd be a thing that would validate my own feelings and thoughts that I already have.
So could I substitute the term, the idea or the position that resonates best with you? Could I say that to you?
Yes, I agree with
that.
that. That's a more accurate and efficient way to say that.
Well, no, it's the way that I say it. It doesn't mean that it's accurate or whatever. That's kind of a waste of
It's more clear. It's more clear.
For some people.
Okay, fair enough.
When I talk about a concept that resonates with me, what have I said to you about that? If I encounter an idea that resonates with me.
You said that it hits that, I think you said like the dumb switch where you just...
I call it the dumb strings.
Dumb strings.
It could be a dumb switch, that's fine. But I tend to say dumb string.
Okay.
It's pulling on my dumb string.
Yes.
So if I find an idea that I like, I have a bit of an issue because it means that it can be pulling on predisposed biases. It could be engaging previously learned knowledge, which makes me more blind.
Right.
Right? If I'm more blind to something, I'm too dumb to know I'm dumb. This could be an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Okay. Right? I would prefer to avoid those. Now, when you have competing experts, content experts, right? Each one of those content experts is prey to the problem that they have a hard time seeing it other than they have already seen it. Okay? When that goes out into the public, when each of these experts is able to be a broadcaster, then they're able to be essentially magnified by the fact that you're a broadcaster and I'm a broadcaster. I don't think either one of us necessarily plays that part well, because I don't repost things. I prefer to pull and to synthesize and do my own thing, which is part of what this is an exercise in, is to synthesize this knowledge, bring it forth, have a conversation about it, model the conversation, and share. Now, each of these experts is prey to their own expertise. They're content experts. So have you heard the term inch wide, mile deep?
Yes.
Right, so the breadth of your knowledge is maybe an inch, but it is very deep.
Right.
Now, people who seem to be well engaged in the philosophy of science, so the underpinnings of scientific investigation, acknowledge the limitations of their knowledge. They know that they're blind because they lack information.
Right.
Right? They're very, very well illuminated on the things that they're illuminated on, very dark on the things that they just don't know.
Correct.
Okay? So you have these experts that end up in social media circles or end up in broadcasting spaces, whether they be social media or traditional media, and they share their expertise. Right? What do you think is going on if I share my expertise, okay, and people grab onto my expertise or your expertise or whoever's expertise, and then a competing expert shows up, shares a competing view, and then varying people grab on and start to magnify that. What do you think that might do to a population?
It almost feels like it's going to divide them. Like it's going to create some type of conflict.
Well, whether it divides them or not, we get an issue of magnifying positions that are prey to the problems of expertise.
So they're always gravitating towards what resonates with them.
The people who are not necessarily the experts themselves, who are listening to the experts, they are going to magnify the positions of each expert. Now, a real challenge is if you are not good at vetting information. Say you're the average person on the street that lacks content knowledge. So let's just say we talk about my profession, we talk about osteopathy. Okay? As an osteopathic practitioner, I can use all kinds of fancy words. I can palpate through your abdomen, and I can tell you something about your liver. Right? I am an osteopathic practitioner who was taught that I can palpate a certain region and I can read information about an organ's function. Okay? If I use the appropriate words, and you believe that you don't know anything about palpating and assessing an organ's function, how are you going to feel about me as an expert?
Oh, I'm going to feel strongly that you know what you're doing, and I'm going to trust you.
Well, you went to school for X amount of time, you've done this, you're a professional, I'm paying you, you must know what you're talking
You're
about.
wearing a shirt with buttons, yeah.
No. When I treat, I don't wear a shirt with buttons.
Okay.
I have an issue with buttons. We've talked about my issues with buttons. Not that I think they're impractical, but how society happens to judge people more seriously based on the location and duration of their buttons down the middle of a shirt.
Very true.
Okay, now, please be careful with the sidetracks. The idea is that if I, as an expert, am in a field that has some poorly informed ideas, I am an osteopathic practitioner. I am an expert in a field with poorly informed ideas. The vast majority of the stories that my profession tells about what they palpate are untenable. When examined, they are not what they say they are. So there is a validity issue. This is not what you say that it is.
Right.
Okay? But because you're a person who believes you're uninformed, you turn to me as the expert and you're like, man, he says something that other people don't say. He must be super smart because he sticks out.
Right.
I would suggest to most people that when an opinion really, really, really sticks out as a sore thumb and does not acknowledge the position of the commonly held positions, cannot tell you why the commonly held positions are a problem in a cogent way, the thing that sticks out like a sore thumb, be careful. Right? The thing that's really far out. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean move yourself into the middle position and believe what the middle position says, because that's not always tenable either.
Right.
The basic idea is that when you believe you lack expertise or you lack content knowledge, you can think less of yourself.
Okay.
You can think less of your ability to vet information. But if I give you information, if I ask you questions, odd questions about a car you've never seen because you happen to have been an apprentice mechanic. If I asked you questions about a car you've never seen, you could probably sort your way through. And if I asked you a question, or I spoke about a vehicle in a certain way, and you're like, wow, that makes like no sense, you'd catch it in a second.
Yes.
Okay, but that's because you feel more confident there. I would suggest that we all need a skill set. So this is why we talk about the idea of preparation for future learning. It's not just about being able to identify that you're in a novel situation. It's having the skills to figure out what to do in a novel situation.
So you not only recognizing that it is a novel situation, but also what to do.
Yeah, so let's just take the current COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that early on there was a lot of competing opinions. There's still competing opinions, and now what we're seeing is the outcome of people with disparate opinions or believing disparate experts with competing opinions. It's now showing up in highly charged emotional displays in public spaces. They're not everywhere, but they're in enough places and enough people are personally broadcasting them that they feel really big. They're not really big.
Right.
It's unlikely that they're actually as big as we may take them to be.
But as you say, like, as they're spreading them. And,
yeah. So this is one of the reasons I like talking about, or I think there's value in talking about gaining a skill set in evaluating information. Because just due to the fact that you are not a content expert doesn't mean you can't identify somebody who's a content expert that is somewhat blind.
Okay.
Right? Or somewhat blind because they've doubled down on their position. When questioned, an expert is unable to show you the problems with their position, right? If you question them at the edge of their position, or the edge cases, or the extremes of their position,
means that they're blind?
It doesn't necessarily mean that they're blind. But if they cannot acknowledge or explain the problems with their position, you should be more wary of them.
Okay.
Right? So if a competing opinion shows up, so expert A says thing X, expert B says thing Y, and expert C says, hey, what's going on with X and what's going on with Y? And neither expert A or expert B, sorry for all the algebraic notation, but say Jimmy and Jane. Jimmy says the letter A. Jane says the letter B. Jim says the letter, hey, what's going on with X and Y, or A and B? I said A and B.
Yes, you did.
Goddamn algebraic notation. But neither of those initial people can explain the problems. I'm not necessarily going to say discard them, but be very wary of them.
Right.
Don't inform yourself on those. Because these experts fall prey to the fact that, number one, they have a previously held belief that is informing most of what they do. They have a position, they have an underlying assumption. If somebody has an underlying assumption and they cannot describe it to you, it's a problem.
I almost feel like it's one of those old school parents that just say, just cuz.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Right? Then you consider that, again, experts know what they're doing, but they are not absolutely good at articulating it. So experts are often not the teachers we'd hope they'd be.
Right.
Right? I happen to be engaged in a master's in health science education, and I understand that there is an art and an expertise to teaching, right? So just because you know doesn't mean you can tell.
Fair enough.
Just because you know doesn't mean you can show.
Right.
So when evaluating or when confronted with multiple experts that are in a confrontational situation, you need to be able to pull back, question reliability. Is there consistency amongst what they say? The consistent things, forget the different things, the consistent things are probably useful. If they cannot articulate their underlying assumptions, be very careful with them. Right? So I think the hopeful thing to pull from this conversation is back and forth, and obviously because I hold a little bit more of the initial information than you do.
Fair enough.
It's not something that you've necessarily done a lot to think about.
Right.
But I think the important thing is to consider that, again, the common problems with experts is, one, that they have a hard time articulating themselves, and they do have previously held beliefs that may make them blind in novel situations. Do you have anything that you'd like to add to the conversation that you haven't done so yet?
Well, I'm just curious if you have these experts that are blind because of their previous knowledge or their inability to kind of let go or pull back from their previous knowledge. How do we get around that? How do we solve that? How do you fix that problem of not being able to let go of previous knowledge?
So I think the initial part is to acknowledge that we all, as human beings, have cognitive hardware that allows us to easily be blinded.
Okay.
Acknowledge that no matter who you are, there is something that you don't understand about what you're an expert in. Okay? Just because you put a lot of work in, if you put a lot of work into one thing, really going after a certain line of scientific questioning, you're an inch wide, a mile deep. You are.
So that's that adequate amount of uncertainty.
Yeah, I know that I know a bunch about something, but even that amount that I know about it, I may be looking at it the wrong way. So I can observably show that the questions that I'm asking, that the information that I've gathered, is stable phenomena. But if you just look at it from a slightly different angle, I look like a dum-dum.
So an expert basically needs to kind of reflect on themselves and say, I know what I know and I know it well, but there's other things that I don't know,
Yes.
or I don't know as well.
Yes. So you don't need to, again. I always have to pull back
Yes.
to not only my own position, but the position that I seem to have shared with my daughter. The second I say you need to, you don't need to.
Yeah, she'll remind you quick.
Which is fantastic. Now, the idea is that it is in everybody's best interest as an individual and as a collective group that we acknowledge that even if we're experts in something, we can't possibly know everything. We are human. Our human experiences are constructivist. The truth in our human experiences and even in our knowledge as one individual is completely dependent upon us. We may know something very clear that is stable about something that is true for me, for you, for a tree. Okay? It may be stable, so we can be identifying and describing in some way or another a positivist phenomena where it is true regardless of the observer. But we have to acknowledge that we're human. Right?
I get that.
Okay, have to. It is in our best interest.
Yes.
Because then we are able to appropriately respond to new information. Okay? So ideally, acknowledge that you can't possibly be correct. You are flawed. It doesn't mean that you can't be awesome, because most of us are. But, I guess, you can be very good at something and still less than complete. It is very unlikely that you'll ever be complete. Otherwise, why would you continue to strive, right? So, all kinds of tropes and sayings and the idea, acknowledge that you cannot be complete, acknowledge that there is something out there, strive towards it, do your best, right? Do your best to identify any situation in which, based on your knowledge, you want to double down. The moment you feel like you want to double down, that is a moment to be extra cautious, right? Because there is a phenomena that when feelings are involved, facts don't matter, right? So if your feelings get involved, be extra careful.
So that's those things that resonate with us, those things that pull our dumb strings, and those things that should make us more cautious and be looking at the information and going, I feel really good about this.
So I would say this. You're less likely to be cautious about things you like. You are very cautious about things you don't like. I would say be extra cautious of the things that you do like because they are your traps.
Okay.
Right? And that is the thing that somebody can manipulate you with. The thing that you do like is what you will be manipulated with. The thing that you don't like is the thing you'll be repulsed by. The thing that you're repulsed by, consider wisely. Consider deeply, because that might be the key to improvement. That may be the key to better for you and better for everybody else.
Almost that level of uncertainty where you need to develop and progress.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, pulling back to the expert can be paid to tell you the things that you like, right? And because they're an expert, in the media world, the expert is able to pull on certain strings and push a position. And we understand that in many media situations, there are experts that are pulling on positions. So we got to be careful of them.
Right.
But the big deal, essentially acknowledging that you are incapable of being complete as far as we can observe. It doesn't mean that you're incapable of being complete, but so far, nobody seems to have done it that we can figure out. Right? So acknowledge that there are ideas that you like that can be presented by an expert, There's another expert that can present things that you don't like. The expert that you like is the one that you should be more careful with,
Right.
because you're just going to follow them.
Right.
The expert that repulses you, think more about them. Figure out how they could be correct in contradiction of what you already like. So that's where I talk about the appropriate level of uncertainty, because you have to explore the positions that you don't like.
Right.
Again, I would caution anybody against an expert that cannot accurately describe the problems with their ideas, right? The edge cases. Because if they can't do that, then what they're doing is they're sharing feelings with you, right? Or they're sharing things that they know will benefit them in a game, right? The game of clout, the game of attracting followers, the game of attracting something, whatever it is. The game of pulling people in.
Using that manipulation, using those traps that are set up for you.
Yeah, well, not necessarily the traps that are set out for you. It's just the people that are.
I just meant with those feelings and with those things that you like and those things that you resonate.
Yeah.
How you were saying that they can be traps for you and they can be added as weaknesses.
So just and this is as an individual. So the primary agent of change is the individual, not the group.
Right.
If everybody in the group as an individual starts to change, the group changes. The most effective agent of change is the individual. So as an individual, be very careful with the things that you like, because those are the things that will drop your guard. Apparently there's an old statistic that most car accidents happened within 5 miles of the home. So when you're in the home stretch, you feel most comfortable, that's where a lot of accidents happen. The vast majority of violence is from somebody that you know. The vast majority of child abuse is from somebody that is very close to them and has access to them. So the things that you feel safe with, check on those. The things that you feel unsafe with, you're already guarded. Think about them. Right. They may have the key to moving forward. You have to attempt some consideration of many things to come to a position where you're like, okay, I've considered the good, I've considered the bad, even the things that I don't like, I can see the good in them. Right. So hopefully that ends up being something that isn't too tangential, that ends up being a conversation that provides some insight. The two keys is that experts have a hard time articulating what they do. They know how to do it, but they're not necessarily good at telling you how to do it, and they are prey to previously their knowledge, right? It doesn't mean they're bad. They're often fantastic at what they do. But usually a good expert will tell you what they do and what the limits are. So look for the expert that tells you the limits. So hopefully that's had some benefit to whoever's looking. And only bottoms, no tops.